We're back now with Rosalie Ham for our June edition of our Rural Network Book Club. How are you, Rosalie?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good.
Welcome.
Thank you.
My name's Michael Burge. I'm Deputy Editor of the Guardian Australia Rural Network. I'm tuning in today from deep water in far northern New South Wales, which is on Ngurrabal country. Ngurrabal Nation exists between the big well-known Kamilaroi country and the Bunjalung country down on the coast of New South Wales near Coffs Harbour. So Rosalie, you're joining us from Melbourne, yeah?
Yes, I am, and it is Wiradjuri country of the Kulin Nation. So thank you, Wiradjuri people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, today we're going to be talking about the book, which you can see appearing over Rosalie's shoulder there. The Dressmaker's Secret is the sequel to Rosalie's renowned novel, which was adapted into a feature film, of course, called The Dressmaker. The Dressmaker's Secret is Rosalie's fifth novel. And Rosalie, tell us, since you're from the country yourself, and we're talking to a country audience, whereabouts do you originally hail from?
Wiradjuri country, which is next door to Yorta country, which is otherwise known as Jerilderie, in southern New South Wales, not too far from the Victorian border. It's very flat, and they grow, we have irrigation, and they grow rice and wheat and all sorts of things. Yeah.
What kind of farm did you grow up on?
Mixed farming, sheep. There was some cattle for a while, but now it's mostly wheat. Not so much rice anymore because, of course, there's no water. And there's a bit of corn I observe lately, but there's also, they grow all sorts of things there now. They've had a lot of people from overseas come in and grow wonderful things like olives and tomatoes and cotton even, but though that didn't last long. So it's a kind of a work in progress, which is good because it means that farmers are trying, adapting, doing their best.
Yeah. And is the farm still in the family today?
Yeah, it is. My nephews run the farm, and I go back and walk around on the farm and stand in a paddock for a while and then centre my person, and then I'm good.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful. Now, of course, the book that we're talking about today is The Dressmaker's Secret. And what I've been burning to know since I read The Dressmaker's Secret and seen the film, I have not read the first book, I freely admit that, but when I see the characters, when I read The Dressmaker's Secret, I couldn't help but see the actors who were in the movie. But where did this whole concept of Tilly Dunnage, the girl who got away from Dungatar, who became a seamstress, where did this whole kind of oeuvre come from?
When I started writing the novel, I was writing it as part of a creative writing course, and we had to write a novel as part of the course. And the thing that got up my nose at that particular time, and the things that drove me that I wanted to talk about, were hypocrisy, bigotry, vanity, hierarchy, all the things in a community, any sort of community, that were under the surface and driving it, as well as all the good and wonderful things such as loyalty, community, the sense of camaraderie, all those sorts of things. But underneath there were all these little petty jealousies, and they were all sort of driven by vanity. And it came from directly the fact that my mum was the town seamstress in Jerilderie. There was a few seamstresses, of course. When I was growing up, everybody sewed, you had to. And so it kind of came from holding the pin tin and listening to the ladies talk, and my mother's observations on what people should and shouldn't wear, and those people's own observations on what they shouldn't wear. And that wonderful phrase that Marigold Pettiman says in The Dressmaker, I need to look better than Elspeth Beaumont. I actually heard someone say, what's Mrs. So-and-so wearing? I need to look better than her this time. And so it all kind of came from that. And it struck a chord with readers, and the whole idea also, you'll be familiar with this, of standing at the local races or the football or some social occasion and looking across the crowd and seeing women dressed absolutely exquisitely, beautifully dressed, very well groomed ladies on this desolate landscape and a dusty racetrack with only 3 horses in the race, and the other people in their stubby shorts with a pair of thongs and a singlet and a can of beer, and how they all kind of mix together and bump up against each other. And there's something in that that's kind of very, very attractive. And everybody's friendly on the surface, but it's kind of what's going on underneath. And people are looking like they don't normally look, or some of them. So they're presenting as somebody quite different on that particular day. So all those sorts of things.
Right. I feel a bit like that myself today, actually, because I have my hat on, my good hat on. It's very helpful when it's cold because I don't have much hair.
Yeah, it's a
and
lovely
of course,
hat.
I have a bit of a linen jacket going on, no shirt, no tie, but from the waist down, you just don't want to see, because it's kind of it's kind of, you know, not for public view. It's just tracksuit pants. That's all.
Yes.
Just for comfort's sake at all. And I've only got socks on. So I feel very much like the kind of thing you're describing, this kind of idea of what's on show, your good hat, what you bring out on race day or show day or that sort of thing. But that's a wonderful way to have described where the inspiration came to you. Sounds very visual. But how did you make the leap between having that as inspiration and actually creating a full-length novel from that idea?
I'm not sure. It's a mystery to me. And I often like to say, when I sat down in that creative writing course and they said, you've got to write a novel, somehow I kind of just started writing it. And when I think back, I think it had a lot to do with story, and how every single person that I saw at the races or the football or at the supermarket, I knew their story because it was a small community. So I knew their triumphs and tragedies, their secrets, you know, and all that stuff about the duality in truth, what actually happened as opposed to what really happened, the truth. But nobody mentioned anything about it. It was all about maintaining the equilibrium. So I had all of those things in my head. And then it's just a matter of craft, you know, that thing where you kind of blurt the story out and get everything down that you want to say, or this is my way of writing, it could be yours too. And then you've got to craft it into a good story. So some of your original ideas and your characters alter or are erased, or you have to introduce new things, but it's just trying to convey the whole world of the story with the landscape and the weather and all the subplots and all those sorts of things. And I actually find that really enjoyable. I find that what the most enjoyable part, I think the hardest part for me is getting down the story and maintaining the impetus of what I want to say. Occasionally I have to go back and think, oh, look at what my original statement, this is what you're trying to say. But I find once I've got all of those things sort of in there, then going back and turning it into something that works, I just really enjoy that. What about you?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of familiarity. I think a lot of writers will find in what you've just said, particularly around the craft, the application of the craft. I think it can be as crafty as knitting or crochet. I imagine it's bit by bit by bit by bit by bit, and you've got the thread coming in one side and your sort of your scarf or whatever coming out the other side. You transform it. But what I want you to do, if you can, is you've written 5 books now, and you've been in the literary scene for 2 decades. But what I want you to do is to go back 20 or more years to when you were first crafting your first book. What was it? Was it difficult? Did you feel gung ho? Did you feel? Was it something that you thought you could not pull off with this idea? How was that period?
I don't. I can't explain it, but I was in that class for about 3 or 4 weeks, and I felt entirely comfortable, and I felt as if, oh, I can do this. I don't know why. I like to say it's like when you open your mouth and you discover you can sing, you've got a voice. But I just found that I might not have been very good at what I was doing, but I found that I enjoyed it and I liked it. and I felt at home, and I was bored to tears in my life. So this gave me something to do, and I stuck at it for 3 or 4 years. And what happened over those 4 years is that most of the class dropped out because they'd said what they wanted to say, or decided they didn't really want to sit in a room for 7 years on their own. And so I ended up with a group of dedicated, determined mates, and we just kept doing it because we enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much. And I remember there was a very black moment when I'd sent the manuscript off, and I remember thinking, what if they don't publish this? What am I going to do? You know, I'll have to find another career. And I realized at that moment, when I was feeling terrible, but it was just a nanosecond, but I realized then that I really did want to keep doing this, and that I really would come up with another story. So it was more happiness at finding something finally to, you know, the other layer to life, the thing that you wanted to make it meaningful, and just absolute enthusiasm and hope and all those sorts of things. But I wasn't entirely confident about my skills, but I knew that you could only get better.
Yeah. Well, faced with a sequel, when you've got a set of characters who already exist and you've crafted incredibly well, so well, in fact, that they've been adapted for the big screen internationally, and they kind of may have gone way, way out of your hands in the minds and dreams and hopes of other people. How did it go? How did it go for you sitting down to write the sequel? Did you have to do some kind of ceremony to take your mind back into that sort of hatchery where the dressmaker came from, or anything like that?
It was fortuitous, because the book, because of the themes, those themes of bullying and hypocrisy and vanity and all those, that everything that I threw in, it got put on the VCE literature list. So the Victorian Certificate of English Literature list. And so that meant there was, not all, but many schools were studying it. And I would go to the schools and give talks, and people always had questions, or because they were teenagers, they had vivid imaginations and they had their own ideas about what happened next. And this went on for 20 years, and I talked about it a lot. I speculated a lot, and some of their ideas were much better than mine. And of course, as you know, you're discovering now that people find things that you didn't even know that you'd written.
Yes.
So there's all of that it was terrific. And so when the film came out, enough time had passed. I'd written a few novels. I had my own voice in writing. When I finally went, all right, I have to write this. It just got the better of me. I thought I better do it, because I found after 20 years that I did actually have a story, because of all the questions and answering them all. And so I just sat down to write them. But it is terrifying. But I told myself, nobody's going to get the emotional impact that they got from the Dressmaker. That's just not going to happen. And people are going to say, I liked her earlier work. And I just copped that. I just went, well, no, people aren't going to like this, and some people will like it. You just got to put it out there and see what happens. And that's precisely what happened. I have some people coming up and saying, well, that was disappointing, or others saying, no, it was a little bit too contrived, and others coming up and saying, oh my God, you've just, made my day. So by the time that all happened, I'd had 20 years of expectation. So I was dressed and ready.
Yeah, very good. Well, for those who haven't read The Dressmaker's Secret yet, don't fear, we're not going to give away any spoilers. A book with a secret in the title is going to be one of those titles that you really can't discuss very much in great detail. Yeah. But suffice to say, the secret in The Dressmaker's Secret is pretty big. It comes out pretty early in the narrative, so we really can't touch on it for fear of spoiling the enjoyment of readers. But those of you who haven't come across this book yet, you'll be very pleased to know that it's a continuation of the story of Tilly Dunnage, and of course the wonderful Sergeant Horatio Farrat. Farrat. There you go. I say Farrat, like a sort of a French, I put a French spin on it, so it's Farrat. Sergeant Farrat. It's very close to ferret. Was that done on purpose?
Oh yeah, that was a part of the writing class, one-upmanship, flexing my writerly muscles, all the names, they all had to be. It was very much a book that came from a writing course. So the names are a little bit cringy now.
I'm going to have to stop myself from saying Sergeant Farrat. Farrat is his name. I was so pleased to see that this character comes back really as quite a protagonist in the story of The Dressmaker's Secret. But Rosalie, my question for you is, knowing it doesn't really spoil the story for readers to explain that this secret, which we won't explain what it is, but it is indelibly linked to the first book in so many ways, but one very significant way. Was that connection something that you knew about long before you sat down to write the sequel, or was that a discovery for you in your reopening to the story?
No, that was about halfway through the process. I decided that would have to be the secret, and that would have to occur as a plot device, to have a secret, to have something more that she had to risk, that meant that she had to really struggle to come to terms with that there would be opposition to that. There had to be a way of bringing the people of Dungatar back into her life. But the thing I really wanted to do was bring Sergeant Farrat, or Farrat, as I'm more than happy to give the French inflection. I wanted to bring him back into the story in a big way, and I wanted for him to have love and companionship and family and acceptance. So there was a huge part of that book that was about not only, costume versus couture versus fashion, but I just wanted the struggle for those who do not conform, illegitimacy, adultery, cross-dressing, whatever it is that you might find in that book. I just wanted those people to be out there and to find an acceptable place with each other. So that secret, when I came up with that, I was very happy with it, because it was going to connect all those things, and particularly Sergeant Farrat.
Well, it's a great success, that inclusion of that secret, which just can't give away. So you've got to read it. Those of you out there watching this, you've got to read it to find out what that is. Rosalie, by the time you sat down to write The Dressmaker's Secret, of course, the film had probably been out in the marketplace for at least 3 or 4 years by that stage. And that was my first experience of The Dressmaker, was seeing the film. It's one of those occasions where I actually got out and went to the cinema to see it when it was out. It was just such a wonderful expression of Australian country living. What I wanted to ask you now is, when you sat down to write the sequel, were you influenced by the characterization and the portrayal of those characters in the hands of a brain and a heart other than you? So, for example, did you see Tilly through the lens of Kate Winslet? Did you see Molly through the lens of Judy Davis, etc.?
Yeah, I did. I tried very hard. There were some characters that really didn't suit what I thought that they should be, but I got so used to those actors portraying them in their own way, and I was so thrilled with what they did, because they actually had a real hoot making it, because I was an extra. So that all, when I came to terms with most of it, but now I can't escape it. When I think of Sergeant Farrat, I just think of Hugo Weaving, and the same. I'm writing Molly's story at the moment, the prequel, and I've just got Judy Davis in my head, but unusually it's Judy Davis from My Brilliant Career, because that book is set back in 1914, 15. But I, you can't not be happy with what they've done. And so in the end, I just thought, well, I'll just go with it. I'll just use those people. And yeah, I have to be happy with it.
Now, you explained a bit earlier that you were an extra in the film. So can you tell us what was it like turning up on a film set? And I guess you were given a costume and a dusting of makeup and kind of shoved onto the set or made to wait for interminable hours for your moment in front of the camera. Tell us what it was like. Was it more than a day's work? What was it?
Oh, yeah. No, we were there. That was one of the conditions I like to tell people when my friend Sue Maslin, also from Jerilderie, decided to make the film. I said, you can, on the condition that me and all my friends and family can be extras. So that was the deal. And she said yes. So there was an entourage of us. There was a bunch of us that had never been on a film set in our entire lives and knew nothing about it. And the hierarchy on set reflected the hierarchy in Dungatar. So we were warm props. We were just the extras way down at the bottom of the rung. But it was hugely exciting and very entertaining, but as you say, really boring, because it takes a very, very... And we went from, oh my God, this is fantastic, to 6 weeks later, if Kate Winslet wants to shoot this one more time, I'm going to stab her in the eye. Just kind of went from that to that, because we were wearing corsets. It was stinking hot. But I particularly loved watching how the characters or the actors became the characters and stayed in character. And there was a scene one day where I had to dance with Hugo Weaving. I was terrified, but he was completely in character. He just kind of looked at me and acknowledged me, and I wandered off. And then when it was time for action, I went and he put his hand out and he looked at me like that, and he looked at me dead in the eye, and I just went, I know I can't stuff this up. I really can't. But he treated me like I knew what I was doing. And so I did. And I don't know how I did it, but I didn't stuff up once, because if you mess up, they've got to stop everything, and it takes $10,000 a minute or something. But I became one of my characters. I became one of my themes, the theme of transformation. And I got off a bus in Dungatar with my nephew, and I met all my characters. And I just don't think that you can get anything better than that as a novelist. And so this, of course, gets back to why I can't erase them from my mind as well.
Yeah. So
like those characters.
It sounds to me like, actually, before you wrote The Dressmaker's Secret, imbued as it is with Sargent's wonderful character, wonderful persona, that you actually met him on the set of The Dressmaker.
Oh, yeah, I had a lot to do with him. Yeah. He was not actually a lot to do with him, but in my mind, in my perception, in what I watched, what we saw, I can't ever get rid of Hugo Weaving. And I'm more than happy not to.
Yeah, wonderful. When was the first occasion that you saw the whole film in its finished form?
I chose not to see anything. I chose to go along with the rest of the cast and crew and extras, who just had the best time. They came from all over Australia, and they came and lobbed in my house, and we got a bus and off we went, and everybody was dressed up. We got in this taxi and went out there, and we sat down and watched the film with, as I say, with the rest of the crew, mostly crew. And I was very nervous. We were all very, very nervous. But at the end of it, everybody said we completely forgot. We just went into the movie and we just enjoyed the story. And I was sitting next to a friend of mine, Angela. She was one of the extras, and she turned and looked at me and she said, "That's a really good film." And I went, "I think it might be." And so, and then of course, we just thought we were marvelous. We just thought we were absolutely superstars, and we came home and drank a lot of champagne. It was just a lovely thing for everybody.
Wonderful. Now, the story of the making of The Dressmaker, the film, is really the story of a couple of country girls who grew up for a certain number of years together, didn't see each other for a while, and then reconnected for the making of this film. So tell us about when you met Sue Maslin, the producer of the film, and what context that was.
Well, the first time I met her, I was about 14 and she was probably about 12 or maybe 11. And she lived at a property called Pudginook, which is 40 kilometres north of Jerilderie, and I lived in the town, and we both went to the same school down here in Melbourne, as you do. And we would travel down on the bus. In those days, of course, they put you on a bus in your stockings, shoes, blazer, gloves, hat, complete uniform, and with 2 suitcases, no wheels, and said, get off at Flinders Street and find your way to Berwick. And that's what we did. And so we would do that quite independently. And there was something about that experience, the growing up in Jerilderie, being sent out into the world and just told, you've got to do it, good luck, that transformed into our later life. So Sue was making a film called Japanese Story. And I think she saw my book at the airport or something and recognized the name and thought, I went to school with the girl 30 years ago. It has to be the same one. And it was. So we reconnected. The option was already taken by somebody else. That particular production fell over. Well, it didn't actually fall over. I pulled the pin on it because it wasn't as I had hoped it would be. And so then I just approached Sue and said, are you still interested in making this film? Because she caught up with me hoping to be able to make it. And I had to say no. But we played golf, and we played golf for about 5 years until I finally said, can you please make my film? And she said yes. And I realised that she'd been dreaming about it for all of those years, and she had a very clear idea of what she wanted to do, and she just got stuck into it, and she just did it. And it was very difficult because 2 of the main protagonists don't make it to the end. One of them's the love interest, and happened to be quite attractive, which upset a lot of people. And it was a female-based, female crew, female cast, female writer, female producer, female director. And so there was a bit of hesitation in whether or not the distributors would get their money back. But Sue, being determined, chose not to change the ending because there was a suggestion that perhaps there should be a wedding at the end. And that was so not what anybody wanted. There was also, it was quite tricky because they wanted to maintain the tone. It could easily go into more slapsticky than it was, or even more tragic. There was the tragedy and the humour that had to collide, and you got irony. You know, it takes certain people to kind of nurse that through. So I think for anyone out there that's thinking about writing a book with a film in mind, just you've got to pick the right producer and the right director to you know, see it to a satisfactory kind of project in the end. And so I was very grateful that all those things worked really well.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, we had, during the few days before this, we got a message from someone else that you knew in your childhood. Her name is Karen. I think it's McBerry. She's from Gilgandra, and she said that you and she attended the Brownies and the Guides together. So she may be watching now, or she may watch this after it's posted on the Guardian website. But there you go. Do you have a sense from having written a country-based story that connections from home are going to continue to raise a hand at events like this?
Everywhere. You've got to be really careful what you say and do, because there's always someone that'll come crawling out of the, not always, but most often, you know, and say, I was at Brownies with you, or I was, and I just can't imagine. There's an awful lot of people that were in Jerilderie at some point and then went off somewhere else. But I'm always very, very pleased to see people, because it's such a good grounding. It's such a good community, landscapey, firm, solid, secure upbringing in a country town like that, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, readers, we're not going to be spoiling the story to say you would have noted there how Rosalie said that there was pressure to put a wedding at the end of the Dressmaker, which there is not and was not in the film. There is a wedding in the Dressmaker's Secret. We can't really explain too much about it without giving things away, but it's a wedding which exists in a world which I think a couple of times you use the term in the book, Rosalie, bohemian, the bohemian kind of subculture in Melbourne. And we haven't really talked about the era that this book is. It's set a couple of years after the Dressmaker, which I think was in 1951 or 50.
Yeah, this one's set in 1953.
53, which is the coronation year, of course, for Elizabeth II. Society of Melbourne, of course, is just a buzz with the whole season of what coronation balls and functions and events of all kinds. And so Tilly finds herself in what you describe as a second-rate couturier on Collins Street. Is that right?
Yes.
I don't know Melbourne well enough to know, but is Collins Street kind of like the cloth trade? Is there an end of Collins Street, which is the cloth trade traditionally in Melbourne?
It was the Shamata district was Flinders Lane, basically, and then around the corner and up the hill a bit there was Collins Street. But it was the hill, it was the Paris end of Collins Street where you really needed to be, up near Treasury and Parliament, but down the bottom near Swanson Street was not. And so it was always Madame Flock's wish to move up the hill, and get her salon in a little bit closer to La Louvre, I suppose.
Right. So Tilly Dunnage has escaped Dungatar, and those of you who know the Dressmaker will know the sort of, incendiary end of that novel and also the film. Tilly gets out of town, back into the big city. She has spent time in her past in a big city. She's been in Paris. But she finds herself kind of in this world of boarding houses, and this, I don't know whether, is it a subculture, bohemianism? I mean, is that how bohemians see themselves? I think in many times in my life, I've been a bit of a bohemian. I think bohemian is a kind of a catchphrase in the country. If you're in any way different, you're kind of bohemian. It's a word that doesn't get thrown around too much, but certainly when I was a kid growing up in the 70s in Dulungra, the people who bought my parents' farm when we moved off the farm into town were described as bohemians because the lady wore beautiful sort of caftans, and she was, the way I'm moving my arms is the way that she would move her arms, and she spoke beautifully, and there was art around the house, and her husband, was very alternative. I'm trying to think of these sort of generalized words without describing them in too much detail, but they were certainly bohemian people, and they stuck out like a sore thumb in the country. She didn't drive. She had to learn to drive, and I think 3 of the neighbours tried to teach her to drive with no success whatsoever on these country roads. And of course, you need to kind of drive, or you're going to have to ride a horse into town or walk, or ride a bike or something like that. But in the city, which is where you've located Tilly in 1953, coronation year, she's in this world of cross-dressers with Sergeant Farrat. We also have a world which touches on themes of illegitimacy for children. Tilly herself, as we'd know from reading The Dressmaker, was an illegitimate child. There's also some themes in there about disability. So you've created this world. So the question is, when did that seed come? Because out in Dungatar, I don't think bohemianism really was a major theme. It was something, Tilly was kind of, to me anyway, was above all that. She was very stylish. She stuck out, but she wasn't in that kind of slightly Fey way.
Mm.
Where did this idea of this bohemian subculture come from? Did you have to do some footwork and some research to bring it to life?
I did, but in Dungatar, you weren't allowed to be different. Because I'm the same as you, growing up in Jerilderie, there was a certain set of people that were a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more stylish, had a better car. The ladies dressed a little bit differently, and they were quite different. And they were fascinating because they just weren't normal scrubbers like me. And because my mum was a seamstress, I kind of had an interest in what they wore, and but in Melbourne, I was very aware that it was 1953, Sir Robert Menzies, post-war, and everything kind of got very conservative and very contained and very formal, very structured, very austere. There was still a lot of rationing going on. And, I just think Australia went back. I just think they regressed in that time and became very conventional. But there was always, and there always has been, an underculture, a sort of subculture that outwardly, like Sergeant Farrat, will dress in a uniform that makes him appear as he needs to be seen, whereas what he really wears at home makes him more himself. And I was always conscious that those people existed and how hard it must have been for them to be themselves in that world. And what would happen to those people who wouldn't conform? I mean, homosexuality, you could have been hung up until 1949, at the very least imprisoned. There was the welfare departments that I was always conscious of as a kid. If you did the wrong thing, they would take and they'd send you to the reformatory. And the idea of the weight of scandal and being different, and the persecution and being snubbed in your own street for being slightly different was also something that I was very conscious of growing up too. So there was that element where you had to conform. So that made it appealing to me to explore that. There was the Seahorse Club, and that was pretty famous. I don't think it was around when Tilly was swanning about in Collins Street, but I kind of took that name and turned it into the Hippocampus Club, because the hippocampus is a seahorse that has its own babies. The males have babies. Yes. And so I kind of skewed all that and made it where the unacceptable became acceptable, because it went with the whole theme of what was acceptable and what wasn't, because most of the straight, normal, conventional, conservative people were the baddies because they were bigoted. It's the same themes as in The Dressmaker. They were bigoted and one-eyed and hypocrites and corrupt. Whereas in my life, my books, it's the bohemians and the bad people that are actually the good people.
Yes, I mean, for those of you who know The Dressmaker film or the book, or the book, we get some return appearances of some of the characters from Dungatar, of course, Sergeant Farrat, but also the McSwiney family.
Yeah.
Is it Swiney or Sweeney?
McSwiney. I call it, you can call it McSwiney or McSwiney, whatever.
Again, I can see the sort of the character behind that word. So the May McSwiney and the whole family, Barney's back. They're living in the suburbs of Melbourne, and they do, in their own way, intersect with this bohemian subculture that Rosalie's described. There's some wonderful scenes in there, which, I mean, the whole of Dressmaker Secret is full of beautiful scenes of suburban life. I think this is a window on a city that I don't really know very well at all, Melbourne. But having walked around some of the suburbs in February when I was there last, you can see the old working class suburbs. It's kind of like, reminds me very much of Balmain and the inner west in Sydney. The old working class suburbs, of course, now renovated within an inch of their life, and they have kind of lost that the life on the streets in a sense. But what hasn't been lost is the scale. The houses really are very close. If they're not terraces, they're very, very close. The backyards aren't great. But it's a wondrful world that you've created there. But I wanted to get back to the research that you had to do, because reading it journalistically, reading it as a member of the queer community, I felt in very good hands about, and I actually learned a huge amount just from reading this novel, which I always love when we learn something about our past from novels, particularly if they're historical fiction. You don't want to come away from a piece of historical fiction not learning anything in the past. But you've touched on some of those laws about the hanging offence for homosexuality, the prison sentence, which lasted up until well into the 1980s in Australia. But I felt in very good hands with that. So tell us, how did you research it? What was the key to unlocking that world?
I asked members of the queer community that I know and love, and I read a lot. And there's also a huge amount of information in books, like books. You've just got to go to a bookshop and stand in front of a bookshelf and just go, how people do, and you'll find something. Librarians know everything. They are the holders of the wisdom of the whole thing. And the beautiful thing about all of that is that it's again, like as you say, you learn so much. It becomes intriguing, and of course you don't need to put all of it in, otherwise you get great screeds of people giving lectures in dialogue. There's only so much that you can put in there, but there's a way of infusing it into the narrative so that it's not spoken, that you can just show how these ideas impact the behavior of people. So that is why I really enjoy research, for that reason, because it is inspiring, and it gives you ideas on craft, how to incorporate those things into a text so that it's not too didactic. But really that's all it is, just your natural curiosity, or that's for me anyway.
Yeah. If anyone who's watching live has any questions for Rosalie Ham, please post them on Facebook, and one of us will net them up and I will pose it to Rosalie before we finish today. But we'll crack on with, I've got a few more questions of my own to get through. So I'm ticking Bohemians off the list. Actually, reading it, I was thinking, have I ever come across Bohemians in Australian literature? And I thought, I'm not well read enough in Australian 20th century literature, but I know that Norman Lindsay wrote a lot about the old battle between the Bohemians and the Wowsers, he called them. I think you'd have a fan in Norman Lindsay with The Dressmaker's Secret, most definitely, Rosalie.
And there's a lot of it, can I just interrupt? There's a lot of it in books on couture, because in books on couture, they talk about fashion and they talk about society. And so you learned about Mercamora having a cafe at the Paris end of, and hosting all the bohemian people of the artists, like the Sunday Reads and all those, the Blackman, Charles Blackman, and all those artists from the 50s, Helmut Newton, the photographers, all of those things. You can read about them, and then you just look at the photographs and see what they're wearing. It's just, the fashion was so much better. And the other thing I must mention, with regard to your question on research, I've got a son who's a lawyer, and I can send him an email and say, what were the laws in 1950, and he'll...
Oh my God, that's perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect. And it usually takes him a long time to get back to me, and by which time I've more or less found it, but that helps, talking to people. But yes, sorry, continue.
No, absolutely. I want to talk now about the city country journeys across both The Dressmaker and The Dressmaker's Secret, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the prequel. So maybe this question can be served by talking about that too. So Dressmaker is set predominantly in Dungatar. There's snippets there of Tilly's past in Paris, etc., and also flashbacks I'm talking in the film, of course, my experience of it, to what happened in the late 1920s. But here in The Dressmaker's Secret, as I've explained, we are right in the Melbourne suburbs. There's beautifully executed scenes, but there are, again, I hope I'm not giving the story away, but there are journeys that go from the city back to Dungatar and the characters in Dungatar are in The Dressmaker's Secret in Dungatar. They're actually, in many ways, having to face rebuilding this place, which to me, look, having written and edited many, many articles about rural regions, not just in Australia, but around the world, in all of the kind of colonial outposts, I suppose, is the best way to describe it, sort of America, Canada, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia. This idea of a town being so transient that it needs rebuilding and could potentially not exist at all. There's hilarious scenes where the train doesn't even stop at Dungatar. It just slows down, and it will only do that if you alert the guard. Are you, my question is, what do you desire to say about country town transients in those scenes, Rosalie? Because they're fascinating.
I think the country towns develop their own little personalities. They've all got a little culture, and there's an attitude from the other, be it the next town or the next city. And so you get the kind of guy that says, look, there's no passengers, there's no point stopping, don't bother stopping, just chuck the newspapers out. You know, there's that sort of thing, because it'll save him changing the track or changing the signals or whatever. So there's little things like that happen, that they develop their own way of doing things in country towns. But there's also a comment in there about the fact that the people in Melbourne, for example, aren't really that different to the people in Dungatar in a lot of ways, in that they all have airs and graces. They all aspire to looking better than what they are, or wanting to seem better than what they are. There's a hierarchy, there's snobbery, and those things are very similar. And you've also got weird people in Melbourne, and you've got weird people in small country towns. These days, of course, it's fused. Like the people of Dungatar were building the town in exactly the same way it was before. They hadn't progressed. But small country towns now, I think, though they've got small insides, and there's basically only an IGA, which is also the post office, and there's an ATM and a chemist shop, and then maybe a newsagent and 17 op shops. They're actually more worldly. Transport is much easier. People come and go. People travel to country towns, so they're not, you know, they're very tolerant of their own small communities anywhere. But now they're even more tolerant of people coming and going, as getting more and more like little cities in a few ways. That's not to say that they're exactly the same. They never will be. But there's just that little element that's snuck in to small isolated communities where they're a little bit more aware and accepting than they used to be. But that said, they don't like change. You know, they don't want, they are intransient. They just don't want, oh no, you can't, oh, it never used to be like that, you know, and work that other way. You could go that way, and you know, and all that. So there's a little bit of, there's always a pull between the bohemian progressive ones saying, no, let's build something new and different, and the other one's going, oh well, you know, never used to be like that, and it won't look the same. So there's all of those things.
In your literature today, you've given us a snapshot of Dungatar in 1926, 1951, 1953. So if we imagine it's a real place, what does it look like in 2022, Dungatar?
The same.
The same?
Yeah, the same people there.
Has anyone sold their land for wind turbines up the back of the hill, Fart Hill?
God, no. Absolutely not. Not in Dungatar. But of course, my niece, who lives in a very small country town in rural New South Wales, she's getting a solar power farm in her back paddock, and they're thrilled. She's thrilled about it. So in that's, you know, changed quite a bit, and people have gone, how marvelous. And there's all the I don't know, the boffins, the people that are interested in things that go click and bang, and transmitters and, you know, electricity. They will come out to have a bit of a look and, you know, see how it's going to be, and they're all showing an interest, and it's probably going to invigorate the whole community. and there'll probably be more of them.
Yeah, it's happening, isn't it?
Yep.
So you touched a bit on the prequel to The Dressmaker, which you've explained is Molly's story. So
Yes.
Molly Dunnage, back in what, 1913, 1914, so just before First World War.
Yes.
Is this the year we call this era the Belle Epoque, I think?
Yeah, they say it was officially just at the very turn of the century, but I mean, this is Australia, so we're 10 years behind.
A bit behind,
anyway. So there's still people in with those stupid S-bend corsets and the large mono bosoms, and but corsets, of course, are going to be soon eradicated because they need the steel for the war. Of
course. So apart from corsetry, can you give us any little sneak previews about the content of this story, or at least what Molly's up to in that time?
And again, I didn't particularly really desperately want to write this either, but I didn't have another idea. And I thought, I'll blow it. I'll just get rid of it. I'll just do it. There's a lot going on. There's suffrage, and there's, they've just been the vote. There's the war. There's a lot of things that are changing. And so I've got Molly there, and I wanted to show people were interested in why she was like she was. How did she get to Dungatar? What happened? Why did she develop the personality that she did? And I found, of course, when you do, by just doing the research to that, I found that everything at the time was against females, women. Everything was. And so in order to progress or, develop or be free or really be emancipated in every way, you were just stymied at every kind of turn. So it's got to do with that. It's pretty early stages. I've pretty much got a pretty shaky first rough draft almost. So you can imagine, what I'm faced with now. And this is the really daunting bit, isn't it? Where you like, some days I just can't go up there and go, no, I can't, it's too hard, but there'll come a point, and this, Michael, where you'll go up there and sit down for a day and come down thinking, I am a genius. I am so clever. So I've just got to get through this bit to that bit, but I'm very much enjoying visiting Judy Davis or Molly Dunnage, in that time, and her parents. And the Dressmaker's Secret, the sequel, was a little bit more serious in tone, so it's quite liberating and joyous to get back to Mad Molly, because so I'm quite enjoying it.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, look, on the strength of having read The Dressmaker's Secret, you've definitely sold one copy for me, because I really would love to explore the origin story, I suppose, of Molly, because she really is. She's noticeable by her absence in The Dressmaker's Secret, and it touches on many themes which I think impacted her life. Of course, daughters mirror their mothers' lives so often, and rebel, of course, as Tilly does. But no, it's a wonderful prospect to have that book in the pipeline, Rosalie. I've got a couple more questions. One of them is about theatre. Now, both the Dressmaker books are just awash with theatrical references. I mean, plays, you talk, the Crucible, I Am Camera, Macbeth, of course, yes, the Scottish play. King Lear makes it in there. The townsfolk of Dungatar have switched over to King Lear. There's pantaloons, there's panniers, there's all sorts of theatricality going on. So do you have a theatre background? Where did this theatrical bent that's in The Dressmaker come from?
Look, the highlight of the year in Jerilderie was the play at the end of the year, and the Jerilderie Amateur Dramatic Society. And my mum was very involved in that. She always fancied herself as a bit of an actress. And then I also studied drama and literature for 4 years. I got a Bachelor of Education in drama and literature. And I like to say I'm not leading actress material at all. So I was always the character actress, which meant I had to sit around waiting for a long time to come on and say my line. But I watched, you know that as a writer yourself, that we are watchers. I mean, everybody watches, but we just use it differently. We're very sneaky about things that we take from people and store away. So I got to watch a lot of stuff that went down during the rehearsals of over 4 years of studying drama. It was all terribly funny. But it's just, it just also, again, feeds into that theme of pretending and acting. And of course, all of those plays reflect what's going on in the book, in the story, because life imitates art, imitates life. And I find that to be the case. Like when we were making the film, the hierarchy of the film astounded me, the crew and who is this, that, and the other, and the formality of it. And we couldn't have a drink from that place. We had to, our drinks were put in a trough in the middle of the oval.
Okay.
And if you were lining up for good coffee, you just got elbowed aside.
Yeah.
Because someone had to get the coffee for a superstar and all that sort of stuff. So that's always, I just find that lovely, and I find it very enjoyable to write about those things.
Well, it comes across, it certainly does. It's a source of great humour and amusement in my read of The Dressmaker's Secret. One more question, Rosalie. I guess it was my first exposure to The Dressmaker was when I pretty much recall reading a review, I would say, probably in one of the Australian papers, about it being, The Dressmaker being a Western.
Yes.
Is it a Western in your mind? Was that a conscious decision you made to create a Western, or was that a reviewer's view of it?
That came from Jocelyn Moorhouse, who adapted the book and who directed the film. And it was a pitch that she used, I think, I'm pretty sure, to sell the idea, to get funding. Because you've got to go into the businessmen, and if you're a girl and you're trying to sell a story that involves girls and dresses and frocks, I think that the word Western and the whole idea of revenge and stepping off with your weapon, which is a sewing machine.
Yes.
I think that probably was, that's where it came from. And the other thing is, because it didn't sit easily into a genre, I mean, there wasn't a car chase, but there was the highs and lows that you would get in a film with a car chase. So people couldn't, they weren't satisfied with where to put it. They didn't know how to describe it. So that phrase, I think, was something that when reviewers didn't quite know what to say, they would use that as a way of classifying it, I think. But I think that that's basically what Jocelyn made, and I think it worked fabulously.
Oh yeah, it really does. But I'm plumping for some kind of producer to pick up The Dressmaker's Secret on the strength of bohemian subculture. That would be great.
Yeah, but I think probably the film industry is a lot different these days, and if ever it was, it's been suggested that it would only be something on one of the platforms, the Netflix or something rather like that. But that's a dream rather than anything that's concreted anyway. I just hoping, because I want to be an extra again and go to a red carpet occasion.
Wonderful. Well, you heard it here on Guardian Australia Rural Network Book Club, what Rosalie Ham wants. If someone out there can deliver it, then get in touch with us and we'll connect you. Rosalie, before we finish up, just indulge us for a minute. Next month in July, on the 6th of July, we'll be talking to our editor, our Guardian Australia Rural Network editor, Gabrielle Chan's latest book, Why You Should Give Up About Farming. It's a non-fiction title. There is no farmers and others. If you eat or wear clothes, the decisions you make influence farming. This important book will change your thinking about food, farming, and how you eat. So that's your challenge read for the first month of winter. Come back to us on the 6th of July. Rosalie Ham, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
I've
you,
had a
Michael
wonderful time
Burge.
chatting to you about your wonderful book, and all the best with the continuation of writing the prequel.
And the same to you with your writing. And thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed the talk.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.